You have called us to live faithfully and act courageously. Keep us steadfast in your covenant of grace, and teach us the wisdom that comes only through Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen.
Please be seated.
Our first reading today is from the book of Exodus, chapter 20, verses 1 through 17. A reading from Exodus. God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol, whether in the form of anything that is in heaven above, or that is on the earth beneath, or that is in the waters under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or worship them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing children for the iniquity of parents to the third and the fourth generation of those who reject me, but showing steadfast love to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not make wrongful use of the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not acquit anyone who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. You shall not do any work, you, your son or your daughter, your male or female slave, your livestock, or the alien resident in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but rested the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and consecrated it. Honor your father and your mother, so that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or male or female slave, or ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Psalm reading for this morning is from Psalm 19. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky proclaims its maker's handiwork.
One day tells its tale to another, and one night imparts knowledge to another.
Although they have no words or language, and their voices are not heard,
their sound has gone out into all lands, and their message to the ends of the world, where God has pitched a tent for the sun.
it comes forth like a bridegroom out of his chamber. It rejoices like a champion to run its course.
It goes forth from the uttermost edge of the heavens, and runs about to the end of it again. Nothing is hidden from its burning heat.
The teaching of the Lord is perfect and revives the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure and gives wisdom to the simple.
The statutes of the Lord are just and rejoice the heart. The commandment of the Lord is clear and gives light to the eyes.
The fear of the Lord is clean and endures forever. Then shall I be whole and sound and innocent of a great offense.
More to be desired are they than gold, more than much fine gold, sweeter far than honey in the comb.
By them also is your servant enlightened, and in keeping them there is great reward.
Who can detect one's own offenses? Cleanse me from my secret faults.
Above all, keep your servant from presumptuous sins. Let them not get dominion over me. Then shall I be whole and sound and innocent of a great offense.
Let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer.
The second reading is from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 25. A reading from 1 Corinthians. The message about the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. For it is written, I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and the discernment of the discerning I will thwart. Where is the one who is wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since, in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, God decided through the foolishness of our proclamation to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks desire wisdom, but we proclaim Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and foolishness to Gentiles. But to those who are the called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom, and God's weakness is stronger than human strength. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Very good.
Well, today's sermon should be about 4 hours long, give or take. That's how I timed it. Don't worry. Obviously, I included about a 15-minute break, so that's well, it would be because these readings really each deserve our attention and deep study. In seminary, I had an entire class on just the 10 Commandments alone. My term paper I was assigned was the 7th commandment, so I'm an expert on that one. Today, though, we will focus on John's Gospel. For one, I can only focus on one thing at a time. I have the attention span of about a dachshund puppy level. But when we read John's Gospel, there's a difference from the other three. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, we call those the synoptic Gospels. It's a Greek word meaning it's the one view. It's because these three Gospels share most of the same content, and they're oriented in the structure of the narrative is that Jesus is moving his ministry from the start in Galilee, and he's moving closer and closer to Jerusalem, and that's how the story is told. It goes from his acceptance to his rejection to his resurrection. Now, if we are allowed to have a favorite gospel, for some people it is John, because John is interested in telling us about personalities, and John uses a lot of symbolism for us to understand the meaning behind what Jesus was doing. There's also less teaching. John doesn't have the narrative parables. John uses the I am statements. All those I am statements come from John's gospel. Maybe the best way to describe these two approaches is the synoptic gospel writers are like reporters. They are telling us what they witnessed, what we are supposed to see. Where John, he's reflective. He wants us to ponder the meanings of things to understand Jesus. So let us take a look. Will you please stand? John chapter 2, verses 13 through 22, the Gospel according to John.
Glory to you, O Lord.
The Passover of the Jews was near, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. In the temple he found people selling cattle, sheep, and doves, and the money changers seated at their tables. Making a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He also poured out the coins of the money changers and overturned their tables. He told those who were selling the doves, "Take these things out of here. Stop making my house into a marketplace." The disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house will consume me." The Jews then said to him, What sign can you show us for doing this?" Jesus answered them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." The Jews then said, "The temple has been under construction for 46 years, and you will raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. After he was raised from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this, and they believed the scripture and the word that Jesus had spoken. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. Our first impressions of people, they say, happen quicker than a sneeze or a yawn, and they tend to stay. I remember my first impression of Elisa, and it was in August of 1993, and they were on the stone steps leading, it was on Mount Zion actually, it was the stone steps leading up to our school, and she had on this little cute gray hat. And I thought, she seems pretty cool. And I was impressed. And I was right. She does those things. As a side note, though, for a whole week, I called her Elsie, because that's what I thought her name was. So I figured that out. But everything else has stayed. What's interesting, though, is she never told me what her first impression of me was. I'm assuming because it was just so awesome, what can be said? However, I'm also not going to ask you what your first impression of me is, so let's save that secret. The first 2 chapters of John, we get our first impression of Jesus. John starts out with, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God." Then Jesus gets baptized. He gathers followers. Then he brings them to a party. And they run out of wine. And he makes more for them. And, we're starting to get an idea of who this Jesus is. And now we are going to Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover. Now, in the other 3 Gospels, it seems like Jesus only went to Jerusalem maybe once or twice in his life. But as John tells us, Jesus went to Passover at least 3 times. So he probably went to Jerusalem as any regular devout, Jew did. Anyone who was devoted to Judaism would participate in these parts of life. So that's likely what happened. However, when he gets there, this story takes an unexpected turn. Now, much of my knowledge of what happens from this time period in history is when I studied in Jerusalem, and I studied with Jewish scholars. So, I was privileged to study with the leading experts on this time in history. And it's called the Second Temple period, is how they refer to it. It's, of course, the Second Temple being Herod's temple, so it's that time frame. Now, drawing on from the accounts of this period, that perspective has helped me kind of fill in the blanks of some of the things that were happening, especially around the temple and this environment. Now, there are 3 times a year that Jews would go to Jerusalem. It was a requirement of the law of their faith. And sacrifices were a normal part of that. And so that's how you celebrated the holidays. And it's obviously impractical. Obviously, it's impractical if you're traveling a great distance, if you're traveling from Egypt or Rome, to bring a bunch of livestock with you, it would not have been easy. And the other thing is that in order for any sacrifice to be approved at the temple, they had to be in perfect condition. So it's not, you're not bringing the leftovers from the fridge. I mean, these things have to be fresh. So first, selling animals was an accepted and established practice. That was not a problem. Two, money had to be exchanged. Is because the temple tax had to be in a specific currency. It was called the Tyrian coin, was what the temple tax had to be in. Not everyone had those. If you're coming from a foreign country, you have the currency from where you're from. It's like every once in a while I'll get stuck with some Canadian money, and I can't use it at Fred Meyer, so I have to wait until my next trip to Vancouver to use the 65 cents or whatever, right? So you have to have the right money to use it. So when you're at the temple, it is partitioned. It's not just like you walk in, like the sanctuary. No, there are different kind of entrances. And depending on who you are, allows how close you can get to the inner sanctuary. So for instance, priests have the closest access, and it's because they were from the tribe of Levi. Levites were the only ones who could be priests, and only certain gentlemen who were priests could actually even get into the inner sanctum. Women also had different access. They had different levels that they could kind of get only so close. Now the outer perimeter of the temple, so what's considered still the temple precinct, that was an area reserved for the Gentiles. That's as close as a Gentile could get. So these were people who were converts to Judaism. They followed Jewish practices, but they weren't born as one of God's chosen people. They weren't one of the 12 tribes. So their access was the most limited. Now, the reason that they have all these distinctions was the holiness code. It was about one's ritual purity. And at birth, that decides basically, one's parameters of how close you can get to God. So when Jesus arrives there, something triggers him. And he goes from, this guy that we have just seen at a party, and he goes into this rage. And in the Synoptic Gospels, we know that it's explained this way, that Jesus responds that way because he tells the vendors that, you have made my Father's house into a den of thieves, basically. It suggests that the problem is that it's their extortion, it's they're taking advantage of people's need for worship, and they're doing it for profit. It's kind of like the prices of things at the airport. I mean, you're stuck with a $15 can of Coke or whatever. There's nothing you can do about it. So, but John, though, if we look at John, what he says, John has a different word there. Jesus says, "Don't make my Father's house into a shopping mall." Basically, it's that one Greek word. It's the Greek word for marketplace that John inserts there. And that word explains now what Jesus did, all his actions. It's from ancient sources that we know that originally the place where animals were purchased and where money was exchanged was in an area outside the temple, in the Kidron Valley in Jerusalem, which is still a valley in Jerusalem. But it was kind of on not the outskirts, but it was outside that area. Now the high priest at that time, his name was Caiaphas, and Caiaphas seemed like an awful guy. Every story you read about him is just like, that's why you probably don't have a lot of children named Caiaphas anymore. Well, what Caiaphas did as high priest is he permitted his supporters that they could move their stalls and their tables into the courtyard of the Gentiles. They could move their stuff into the temple precinct. There's a number of reasons he did this, but one, it just seems like he was kind of getting back at his political opponents who were on the ruling council, what we see as the Sanhedrin, which is both religious and kind of political overseers of the Jewish people. And religious politics go back a long way. So transacting business within the temple area would have caused an unnecessary amount of crowding, because all people had to go there now into that one little area, and it would have smelled. It would have been distracting. This would have offended a lot of people. Besides Caiaphas' supporters, it was, again, also the only place that the Gentiles could worship. And now they were kind of being squeezed out of that area. So at a time like Passover, Jerusalem, this walled ancient city, it drew 3 times as many people as were usually there. Think of going to a Mariners game and you're trying to fit 200,000 people into the stadium. It would have been difficult at a baseball game. And I've been to the wall, the Western Wall, the Wailing Wall of Jerusalem. So I have some idea of the scale and scope of this area. And now what they're experiencing is that this area of the temple is more like the state fair. Is really what it's like. Think of being at the fair, the Yakima County Fair, or one of our state fairs, and it's like Labor Day. It's hot, and it's just wall to wall people. And we're you want to walk through the livestock building. And the livestock building has all the wonderful smells and sounds that accompany it. You have to watch where you're walking. And you're shoulder to shoulder with people. And all of a sudden, what we want to do is we want to stop and have our Christmas Eve Candlelight service. And we better sing Silent Night at the end. But that's what it was like for the Gentile worshipers there. That's what their experience with God would have been like for them. What Jesus did, it makes sense. I am sure that those vendors were ripping people off. That was probably happening. And it outraged Jesus just as much as what happened with something taking up space that should not have been there. Jesus could be outraged about more than one thing. He could have been, these two things are not mutually exclusive. Both of them can be true. And there was no reason for him to be nice about this. I guess he could have gone, to each person down the line and asked them very nicely, could you please take your stalls out of here? Or he could have used maybe a softer whip on them. But think of it, practically speaking, it would have been impossible, to go in this crazy crowd and tell people, explain to him what he needed to do. Also, it's just, the people there had permission to be there from the high priest, so they had no reason to listen to anyone else. And obviously, they didn't have any moral issue personally with what was happening. Jesus didn't need to act or be nice. It was his house, after all. And he had to do something that would get everyone's attention, and he did. And he literally and symbolically cleared out the obstacles so people could worship God. So that's my introduction to text. We'll take a 5-minute break. Stretch your legs. Of course, I'm joking. There will be no break. Let's get back to work. Now, no one tries to stop Jesus. And it's because there were probably people there that agreed with what he did. They liked the fact that somebody was doing something. Because we'd expect the Jewish leaders to immediately do what? They would grab him and arrest him if they thought this guy is causing a disturbance. But they didn't. In fact, we know, well, that's what happened years later, but not here. And so they question him, and they ask him, they ask him basically this: we want to know, what inspired you to do this? And these are people who asked a question that they were wondering, is this a prophet? Is this a prophetic act? Or is this even a messianic one? So their question is is more that they're interested in why he's doing this, rather than a hostile question to him. Now, even though they might have been allies, notice how Jesus answers their question. He confuses them, and the disciples are confused too. He talked about, I'm going to destroy this temple, and it's the place that he just cleansed. So what's that? Now, by all descriptions, and you can see, you can see pictures of what it might have looked like, reconstructions of it, and the temple would have been breathtaking. I mean, it was an amazing structure in the ancient world. In fact, even the Roman general Vespasian, who was ordered to destroy it, hesitated because he thought it was so beautiful. He did it anyway, but it was something that everyone recognized, and everyone understood what the temple represented. The temple was the place that one goes to, because that's where God interacts with us. From the start of John's gospel, he tells us that Jesus has come to change that. When Jesus is the temple, it means that we dwell with him and he with us. It's in every moment. And our lives, they become holy. It's because of grace. Grace has replaced sacrifice. And all the obstacles that prevented us from being close to God, they're gone forever. So to conclude, one ritual I do observe is the rite of spring cleaning. And it's hard to clean house. And I get, the idea is to get rid of things I don't need as much as anything. And why that's not easy is because there are just some things, like I really think, well, I should hold on to that. I need that. I have a box full of like old computer junk, stuff that doesn't work. I don't even know what most of it's for. I brought some to show you. I have a whole, like, it's bric-a-brac like this, like a mouse with a cord. Like I literally don't know what these go to, but I've saved them because someday mystery technology will appear that I will have to be prepared for. No, I have no idea why I hold on to all this junk. It's like a plague, it's spreading. Lent is our spiritual spring cleaning. It is the time to realize that there are places in my life that Jesus needs to clean out. And he is the only one that can do that. He is the only one that can internally cleanse us. I become too comfortable with certain attitudes and behaviors, and they just stick around, and they clutter up my life. And sometimes Jesus needs to get my attention in a big way. It's the only way I'll listen sometimes. And I've heard from other Christians that, yeah, this is something that happens to them too. And they're, we're glad. Because to get closer to Jesus, he needs to make space. And this reminds me of one of my favorite quotes from one of the greatest books ever, which is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. And I'd like to share this quote with you. Great tiny print. And it's the scene where the children are with the beavers, the family, and they're hearing about Aslan for the first time, the Christ figure in the story. And they explain Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Oh, said Susan, I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I should feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. Oh, that you will, dearie man, and make no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. Yes, he is good.